Welcome back. Today we're going to do a little talk on a set called KBEAR's LittleQ. So for those of you who were following along, KBEAR sent out this announcement for a really small, inexpensive, affordable set called LittleQ, and they actually called it a sleeping set. So I don't normally sleep with IEMs in my ears, so I will have to take their word for it that it is comfortable to sleep with and maybe has a some kind of design that makes that facilitates that, but I'm not really sure. It is a small, affordable set, and we're going to really talk about LittleQ sort of tuning-wise. It's relatively similar to a few other recent sets that I had actually received from Keephifi, so thank those guys for that. So going back a little while, there was a set called Astrotech Vesna. That's about $20. HZ Sounds Waist Drum, which was actually talked about quite a bit up until the release. And then I think it sort of faded out of popularity. I think part of it is the price at $34. It's kind of a little up there in the group. And then we have LittleQ, of course, which is about $15.29. So when I think of these three sets, they sort of all follow a similar tuning pattern. And I kind of call this tuning pattern this kind of swoop and gain. So what really happens is, and you can actually see KBEAR LittleQ, this is the fun part, kind of this swoop from quite a bit of bass straight through into the mids, carry a lot of energy straight into the mids, and then you almost immediately start rising into the gain area. So these are not kind of flat linear mids. This is your thicker, heavier, definitely bassier style mids, at least for LittleQ. But you can kind of see all three of these sets. So LittleQ is blue, Vesna is in the green, and HC Sound is in the red. So of course KBEAR has a tendency to do a bassier set, so it definitely has a much heavier, this is a lot of bass, this is kind of quite a bit of bleed, this is going to be recessed mids. That's what this little pattern kind of gives you, where you don't really spend a whole lot of linear time in the mids. So kind of a sharp angle in, sounds quite natural. It's just kind of thick and heavy, but then you almost immediately kind of bounce this way and start into your gain. And in the gain area, you're either at HC Sound, where they really try to push a lot of detail, make it a little more analytical to really balance this level of mid bass here. So their thought was, well, we can put sort of a reasonable amount of bass here and then sort of pump in detail here. Vesna, I think, actually cuts through probably the most middle of the road path through this, and it's just a little bit more bass than waist drum, and then you sort of do this middle path through, so not nearly as much gain as HC Sound. And then KBEAR sort of did the darker version of that, so lots and lots of bass, and then a much gentler rise here. So it's sort of a heavier, bassier sound here, and they gave you just enough detail here, and the balance is actually pretty good. Between Vesna and LittleQ, it really comes down to this gap right here. So just for the sake of argument, when you look at what other sets do, so Chew is sort of the opposite of this tuning, but has a similar gain. So Chew does this very shallow bass shelf, and you can actually see, so the air gap between this tuning is sort of the difference between Chew and all these other sets, where Chew people will call it a little lean and maybe a little bright. These three sets are definitely heavier, bassier, a little bit darker, but so Chew does this mean path through here, and then you get sort of more mids, more open mids, and then you rise not nearly as much as HC Sound, because you don't have to counter a whole lot of bass here. You're not really cutting through with gain, doesn't really have to cut through anything here. You just have to balance this with this, and that's exactly what Chew does. Whereas the other three sets, they're basically lots of bass here, makes it a lot fun, but then you have to do something over here, otherwise it sounds very dark and very muffled. And that's why you see three different levels of gain here that are all above. Chew is just about at 10 dB. When you start to go above 10 dB, that typically means that you have a pretty good bump here, and that's exactly what happens. So 3 sets, 3 different price ranges. I would call this a similar pattern in tuning, and you just have to think about whether do you want, the more bass here, or do you like a little more detail here, and you sort of get 3 ranges. If this was one set with 3 tuning nozzles, this is pretty much exactly what you would see. You would see the bass set, the balance set, and the treble set. And so now you've got LittleQ is your bass set, Vesna is your balance set, and AC Sound is really your bright set. So there you go. 3 sets, 1 graph. So do take that as a little lesson in that style or that pattern of tuning. So let's jump into LittleQ really quickly. As I said, we'll kind of fly through this. The design and size, you're really paying for this sort of style of shell, size of driver. You get, even at $15, you can certainly find other regular shells that probably have a little better sound quality. So you really are investing in whether it's a sleep set or this bullet style design. That's kind of that's what the attraction is for LittleQ. So sound, as I said, is kind of bassy. It's got a very non-fatiguing treble level because it's a bit darkish, and it's very relaxed and kind of lower on the technicals. And again, this sort of style of carrying in a lot of bass energy straight into your mids, you're not going to have a highly technical set. You're going to have a set that sounds kind of reasonable. If they get the gain part right, vocals tend to sound pretty normal, but if you get those wrong, then it tends to sound very muddy and not very articulate. So they did a pretty good job on LittleQ. Just don't expect a super technical set. Bass wise, that's the primary set. Like I said, it's got a big swoop through there, and it really dominates the sound on LittleQ. And this one is probably more of a quantity over quality, but definitely you can find slower, less defined bass sets at higher prices. For what it is at $15, not too bad. The mids, like I said, they're going to be a little bit recessed, and they're really saved by that steep pinna gain area. So lots of bass here, which kind of muddies up the sound, and you try to cut through with a bigger peak here. So they get a little smaller peak at 2.5 and then a bigger peak at about 6. So if you're a little sensitive to those areas, then do think about that. So recessed, saved by those little peaks, but overall it's actually very likable. Better for sleeping than critical listening, I think. Just enough resolution and detail to sound right. So treble-wise, decent level, it's okay. You can see that all 3 had a very similar treble level once you get past about 8K. Decent level, but it's very relaxed and very laid back. Nothing soaring here. Your strings aren't really going to be soaring all that much in your ear, but you're not really missing the lower mid part of the treble either. So it definitely struggles competing against the bass level like everything else. Stage-wise, it's okay. These relaxed levels give it nice space, and it doesn't sound flat because there's not a whole lot of treble banging in your ear. But without a lot of that upper treble, it just sounds to be a little bit smaller than maybe what you're used to with some other sets at $15. But overall, it's actually not bad at all, and it doesn't feel too constrained or flat or lacking depth or height. It's kind of generally pretty good. So that is a quick talk on LittleQ. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.